Hello, everyone. Welcome to the customer panel, Benefits and Challenges of Postgres in the Enterprise, hosted by Bruce Momchen. My name is Archana, and I'm part of the marketing team at EDB and will be the moderator for the panel today. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. The recording of this session and the other sessions scheduled today will be available in the expo area at the EDB booth. For this session specifically, the recording will be available from tomorrow. The lines are currently muted, but if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat session area located at the right side of the screen under Stage tab. This session is scheduled for 50 minutes, and we expect the last 10 minutes to be for the Q&A. And without further ado, I will hand over now the stage to Bruce to start the session.
Well, hello, everyone. It's been a great day for Postgres Build. I've had a chance to listen to some of the sessions, and I think everyone is probably very impressed at the quality of the material we've been able to sort of gather here. And I really, there's a couple of videos I missed I want to go back and see. So again, day one has been really good as far as I can tell. This final session is a live session, which involves my discussion with three people who are very heavily involved with Postgres in their enterprise deployments, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves in a second. My name is Bruce Momchen. I'm a Postgres core team member and enterprise DB employee. My primary responsibilities are working with the Postgres community. One of the goals of this session are to really address some of the sort of ephemeral questions about Postgres, things that are not necessarily technical, but are more operational, are more anxiety producing things that you always wondered about, things that challenge you within your organization, but you never heard anybody talk about it before. So that's going to be my goal, is to try and sort of tease out these inner anxieties or inner questions that you have that you maybe never heard anyone talk about before. And with no further delay, I'm going to be able to introduce our three panelists. We will be trying to take questions from the audience toward the end, so feel free to type your questions in there. Let's start with Farid. Farid, if you could tell us again your name, your title, what type of organization you work in, and if you would share with us your story about how you chose Postgres and some of the experience you've had, I think, in the year or 2 years that you've been involved with using it within your enterprise.
Yes, thank you, Bruce, for the introduction. So my name is Farid, Farid Duac. I'm working for GRDF. So this is a French company. For those who doesn't know who is GRDF, we are responsible for the distribution of natural gas, sorry, for 11 million of customers for daily use as heating, cooking, mobility, industrial processes. So we are a very, very big company in France. So I guess that in every country we have the equivalent for the gas distribution. I'm working with GRDF since 2017. So just 3 years, I'm working with them. Unlike the most of you, I'm not a database expert. I'm just the manager of the database expertise team. In my past, I was working with big companies as Kering for the data centers migration. So this is my main activity, my main specialty. Regarding the data, so since I'm working with GRDF, I'm managing the database expertise team because the main challenge for GRDF was to build some strong service offers regarding the databases. Just few more words about GRDF. As you know, energy is more than ever a crucial issue for the next generation, and natural gas will play a major role. So GRDF has to find some new way to produce natural gas, green gas, and another way to distribute it. So relation with this gas activity business, the data are very important. So the IT department is very focused on the quality of the resilience and the solid and the growth process of the IT in GRDF. So regarding it, most of our business applications are Oracle based. Some of these applications are very old and are MySQL based. So regarding it, my main challenge with GRDF is to build some solid service offers to be able to make sure that all our databases that are the core of our business finally are secure, reliable, and efficient to maintain our business. So for the Oracle part, we have built this service offer since for 3 years for now. It is very solid but as you know all very expensive. So now my main goal is to make sure that we have a solid service offer that can challenge the Oracle one. So PostgreSQL seems to fit with all our objectives, but as we are a very big company and we have some real I don't know what to say that properly, but we have to make sure that all the solutions that we will bring to our business are reliable, and secure. So the PostgreSQL service offer won't be enough for us. So this is why since 2019 we are working with EDB Postgres to make sure that we will have the good support on the PostgreSQL based services to secure and scaling up our tools to make sure that all our organization and all my DBA will work with reliable tools. So this is why we have choose EDB Postgres because of all the tools that are developed by EDB are fit all together, and this is very important for us. For now, my team is already working with Oracle databases, PostgreSQL databases, MySQL, Cassandra, and the main objective is to only have Oracle databases and EDB Postgres. So to make sure that we will manage only 2 different service offers, that all our procedures and all our work is already homogenized. So this is why we are working with EDB. And on January, on the next year, we have contracted an ACS contract and a term contract to make sure that we are well supported by EDB on our main challenges. So the migration of MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL databases to EDB Postgres, and to make sure that our business is well ended and secure with PostgreSQL tools, but with the support of EDB.
Thanks, Farid. Appreciate it. Now, Ferdinand, you're also in the energy sector, but you're in Germany, right?
Yes. My name's Ferdinand Vogler.
You were muted for a second.
I'm sorry. Yes. So, Ferdinand, you're also in the energy sector, but in Germany, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah, my name's Ferdinand Vogler. I'm working for the German power company RWE, a large power company from Germany. I'm not with the subsidiary that actually creates the power, but I'm more in the trading area. So we are called RWE Supply and Trading. So we're doing all the energy and gas, oil, power trading. And that's obviously something where you need a lot of data. And basically, I'm an enterprise architect there. So I'm not, as Farid, I'm not one of the nitty-gritty DBAs. I'm more about innovation and getting some new tools in. And historically, we had a lot of large clusters in our data centers, so huge clusters where we have a lot of consolidated databases. And the tricky part was now we wanted to move out of data center and use more cloud-based technologies. So we looked, I think it should be 2 years ago, we looked into what options we had, and we checked what features we currently use or what features we currently require. And that's where we basically found Postgres and also EDB. Historically, the problem with us was when we had these clusters, as all software or all applications we developed were built so they could run on these big clusters. So a lot of this needs to be changed. And a lot of these applications need to really checked and analyzed how we can basically build a good architecture around, with the new technology and not stay on applications that have been, where the architecture has been architected around technologies being available at that time. And that's where Postgres comes in, because for us, it's really an enabler to move to the cloud. We've looked into a couple of providers there. I know we had already had this talk today on RUC. It was quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And we also took a look into these hosted solutions of Postgres, because when you talk to our developers, they always say, we don't want to run databases. We just want to click a button and have them available to us.
And how long have you been using Postgres, Ferdinand?
I think the longest time was 2 years now, 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
So we're basically at the start of the Postgres journey.
Yeah, and I think Farid was 1 year, 1.5 years, something like that. And then Benny, you're my long timer, right? So why don't you introduce yourself and talk about what you guys do?
Well, my name is Benny Rutten. I'm working for a financial services company in Brussels, Belgium. We have been using Postgres for the past 7 years, and it started basically as a way to reduce database costs. But in the end, it appears that Postgres would have been a choice for us, even if costs were not the primary decision factor. So we managed to set up Postgres in a very, in my opinion at least, in a very robust way. And we have had no problem that's worth mentioning. Our developers adapted instantly to Postgres. Every new application goes on Postgres. I must say, I'm the one who introduced Postgres and proposed it to my management. And the easiest way for my management would have been to say, let's not change anything, never change a winning team, as a matter of speech. But they accepted the challenge and they took the risk, which is, admirable. I was really lucky that, or basically we were really lucky that my management was open to change. So that's my story.
Yeah, it's very rare I get to see 3 people all together at different parts in that journey to Postgres, right? So for Farid, a lot of it I think was cost containment, right? Cost reduction. And then Ferdinand, you're a little more in the middle. You're saying, well, there's the cost issue, but also we have the flexibility of deployments and it gives us more options. And then for Benny, you're like, well, cost really now almost isn't in the equation anymore. It got us in the door, but effectively it didn't, when we look back now, it isn't really the real reason that we're so excited about the technology. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. They did a study. Black Duck did a study where they surveyed people who were using open source in their enterprise, and cost ended up being the fifth most important reason that people used it, even though cost was why they originally considered the switch. Right? Don't get rid of a winning team, but cost kind of got them to think about leaving the proprietary team. But once they were with Postgres, I think a lot of the things changed. I was talking to my boss a couple of days ago, and I said sometimes I think of Postgres as the $5 supermarket chicken. in the United States, there's these supermarkets sell chickens in the back to get you to go in to buy a chicken, and then you get some other stuff while you're there, and the supermarket makes some money. Sometimes, Postgres being the inexpensive option, people think, oh, well, now I'm going to go in and look, but then all of a sudden they see there's so much more there, right? And they end up effectively the cost really isn't the ultimate driver. You don't have conferences like this about saving cost, right? It's really about the technology. It's about the flexibility. It's about the reliability. It's about the feature set, and the cost is kind of down on the rung after a while. Once you start to use it, Farid, you may be looking at it just to the cost. Ferdinand, you're now seeing a little more of the flexibility, and then Benny farther along is seeing the other. But also, to get a little more practical, Postgres is almost never a zero cost solution, right? And a lot of enterprises, I think, get confused by that. Have you had these discussions, Benny or Ferdinand or Farid, about in your organization, when you bring Postgres in, they think, oh, this is going to be a no cost thing. And everyone's like, well, not always.
Well, for us, it was a reduction in cost. Because we were paying expensive licenses to a competitor. And so, but indeed, like you say, if you expect that open source is free, then of course it can be almost free, especially the license cost. You'll have to run it on some hardware, which will cost money. You will need people to run it. So it's never free, but the license cost for us, compared to what we are used to, is really inexpensive. I think we pay now between 5 and 10% of what other databases cost. And that's because we insist on having 24/7 support. And that's how we got to Enterprise DB, basically. If you don't need support and you're willing to risk it, you can run the open source version without anything. And it will probably run well if you set it up robustly. But in our case, we want 24/7 hour support, and EDB has that. And I must say, I have 7 years experience with EDB support, and it's very good support. I mean, you don't have to fill in endless questions on web pages. You just send a mail, help, and they will reply within 2 minutes and say, what can we do for you? And it's really amazing, the support we get from EDB.
Yeah, and I'm assuming all the support organizations are great. I mean, I know Second Quadrants was great. I'm sure Postgres Pro and Cybertech, there's Crunchy. They've all got really good support, and the reason they really, really good support is because they have to, right? With a proprietary option, Ferdinand, you probably dealt with it. But with a proprietary, or Fadi, with a proprietary option, you have to go to the vendor who can see the source code. And you really don't have a choice, right? You're kind of stuck. So they don't have to provide great support because you have to go to them. So you're kind of locked into that. And you see that in poor support. You see that in high cost, right? Because you're kind of a hostage. With open source, you can get if you don't like EDB, you can go somewhere else, right? If you don't like SRA or whatever, I'm trying to reel off all the support companies I can think of. Creditive, right? If you don't like somebody, you can go somewhere else, and they know that, right? They know that you can go somewhere else, and that keeps them honest. That keeps them, really motivated to provide really good support. So I think that sort of checks and balances, and the fact that it's open, kind of is a check against companies that don't provide good services and good support. But you're right, Benny. You could do it all yourself if you want to. Ferdinand, Fadi, did you guys ever consider doing the support yourself?
We actually are doing this for part of our systems, but it really
you
depends.
do? Okay.
because for some, especially for or non-critical systems, it's easier to provide.
Right.
Because if you want 24/7, that can get expensive quickly. Then you need DBAs 24/7 available.
Right.
You need hardware support. I mean, this you usually have, but yeah, depends a bit on the use case.
So are you saying some of your systems have support and some of them don't?
Some of them are supported by us, and some we bought the support for.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. If you have a departmental server that can be down for a day,
Yeah.
right? Maybe you don't. And actually, that's another great thing about open source is I was talking to a customer last week, and they were running on Exadata, and it was pretty much maxed out, and they had new data needs. And they basically said, we have new data needs. We don't feel like going out and buying a new Exadata box and going through the whole. So they basically were constrained by how much data they could process based on whatever they were willing to spend, kind of. Whereas with open source, you're right. You can try things. You can have departmental servers that don't need the support, and therefore, you're willing to kind of work to fix it yourself. But then you're right, you have some critical stuff that can't be down. They're very expensive to be down. And then you get support for those. What about training? Have any of you used training support services, training services?
Well, all the training we bought from a partner of EDB, Nibble IT in the Netherlands.
Nibble, yeah, they're very good. Yeah,
Yes.
I've heard them. They're very
Extremely good. Yeah. EDB has trainings too, but they are currently not so easy to get to. I think maybe it's COVID related. I don't know. But Nibble IT in the Netherlands is really knowledgeable, and the guys there, it's a couple of brothers. They're really knowledgeable. They know what they're doing.
And they've been around for years, so they're
yes,
they've been up and down.
They know it.
I mean, and I guess it's the same issue with support. Like you could go out and buy a book, right? Instead of paying for support, and I guess learn yourself and try and figure out what's important and what's not. And but again, it's really a question of efficiency, right, Benny? I mean, you bring somebody in for a couple of days to do training,
if we buy support, we don't only get support, we also get the tools of EDB.
Right.
So the tools we use and which are really, I would recommend to use is a backup tool, a BART, backup and recovery tool from EDB. We also use the failover manager, because every environment we set up is with master standby. So we have a failover manager that manages and keeps an eye on that environment. And we also use the enterprise manager. So we buy support, but we get much more than support. We get the tools. And those tools may have problems or bugs or whatever, less and less over time, but that's also part of the support package, is support tools.
And that gets into another, enterprises find sometimes when they're going to Postgres is so many options. Ferdinand, you had said that you were using you were self-supporting some of your machines, and therefore you're choosing, I guess, the tooling to use around the database. See, normally when you buy a proprietary database, it comes with a single set of tools. There's one backup manager, there's one monitoring, there's one failover, right? There's one maybe replication. How did you handle that?
The ones we personally, or the ones we support from our side, are we mainly buy from the big cloud vendors. So they have good tools in place already. So it was easy for the DBAs and for the infrastructure support to be able to support this. But obviously, these are the more uncritical or non-critical systems. So the bigger ones, of course, we're using some more specialized tools there, but that's what we basically want to have for the critical systems.
Okay, so you're saying your non-critical things are in the cloud and your critical things run bare metal in-house?
No,
Is that right?
also in the cloud, but the hosting.
Also in the cloud.
But it's self-hosted versus basically
self-hosted versus right.
PaaS or SaaS.
Farid, how are you handling that?
Everything is in our data centers for sure, for security reasons. For non-critical systems, we are using PostgreSQL, okay, without the support of EDB. For the most critical applications, all the environment, so from the development to the productions, we need the support of EDB, Postgres for sure. So for the moment, we are pretty young into our relationship with EDB. So we only deployed our first critical environment in December with EDB, and for now it went pretty good using failover management, BORT, PEM also for the administration and for the supervision. So for the moment, I cross my finger. We haven't need the support of the EDB support, so we are pretty lucky for now. But during the next year, regarding all the challenge that we have, we will need for sure the support of EDB. So I guess that you will hear from GRDF for the next month.
Yeah, I'm laughing because years ago I remember one of the salespeople complaining, and they said, "Can you add some more bugs in Postgres so like there's more need for support?" I'm like, we're in the back of a car going somewhere, and I just kind of laughing. But people, in some ways, I have heard that from a business perspective, because if the software is that reliable and you go a whole year and you've never had to call support, and you're like, well, why do I need support? Well, things happen. People make mistakes. Hardware goes bad. There are these cases, but a lot of people are used to proprietary databases that need a lot of support and hand-holding and stuff. And then they go to Postgres, and it's a little harder to set up, I think, because it's a little more manual. But once it's set up, it pretty much runs itself and doesn't assume you need a full-time DBA. So there's a case where it's what you were just mentioning. Oh, you haven't called support. Benny seems to get support a lot. At least somebody's using it. But yeah, that was. Can you add some bugs so people need support more? It was kind of funny.
Maybe.
And actually, that gets into another question, and maybe I'll throw this to Ferdinand. How do you when you're starting with Postgres? How do you choose which application to start with?
When we started, we were looking mainly in applications which were newly developed, because then we were free from all the legacy stuff where we might need to translate something or migrate some code, which was always a problem. So we started off with some new applications, and actually at the moment we are looking more into migrating legacy applications. So we are pretty good with having something in Postgres if we build something new, but now comes the hard part, really moving stuff.
Yeah, we've heard that a lot. There's some people who kind of start, and I'm going to warn against this, sort of shooting for the moon. They're like, they walk up to the, we use a baseball analogy, they walk up to the plate and they're going to, they're going to hit a home run, right? Well, if you know baseball, if you start out trying to hit a home run, you have a more likelihood of striking out because you're really trying to hit it hard, and there's less likely to connect with the ball. If you say I'm going to get up and I'm just going to hit a single, a little more likely you're going to succeed, right? So in the early years we used to have people who would just kind of walk in and say, okay, we're going to do Postgres and we're going to take the most complicated application and try and port that one. And it didn't usually end up well, just like trying to hit a home run. There's certain people who are really great, but the average person is not going to be able to pull that off. And you're absolutely right that starting with something simple, particularly something is not mission critical and is a new application, would be the two, I guess, criteria I think are the most important. But then you're right, Ferdinand, you get to a point where all your new stuff is done, right? Benny, you're saying all your stuff's on Postgres now, right? Is this your experience?
No, not at all. We have legacy applications that we decided not to touch.
Okay.
And we decided to only go with new applications on Postgres. So that's what's happening. All our new applications are on Postgres, and the old applications are still on other databases. We could have taken the risk, but our old legacy applications are so huge and so, well, not many people don't want to take the risk to edit the code, and so it was deemed safer to keep them running as is, and only move ahead with Postgres for new applications, which is, in my opinion, a very good decision to make. If you start with a new technology, it's always good to have it run as a success and not as a bunch of problems or as a major source of problems. So we only use it for new applications. The new applications are written from a different perspective than in the past. Now we talk about microservices. So every little component of an application gets its own database. So we have many application databases for basically the same application, and it works out well that way. We don't have huge databases. The largest databases are less than half terabyte, and that makes for smooth backups. Any operation that needs to be done on the database is fast. We don't have much downtime. We never had to restore a production environment, but I'm going to touch some wood now. But we once had a legacy application that crashed basically, and we had to restore. And the restore took like, only copying the backups back took like 23 hours or something. And that's something we will never have with Postgres, because the different way we set it up. Microservices, relatively small databases, but many databases. But many small databases make one big database basically.
Benny, do you? I'm trying to pull that together. So Ferdinand said he had the he's got the new stuff and he's converted that over, and then new stuff he's building on Postgres. Some of the older stuff, legacy stuff, he's in the middle of converting. It sounds like only your new stuff. Now usually the problem with microservices and databases is that at some point you've got to centralize all that data because it's too interrelated. Are you really thinking that you're going to be able to continue with the microservice process? Even are you using Postgres for microservices only because you've got the legacy databases which are holding the sort of aggregate data? Is that what it is?
No, not at all. The new applications are supposed to gradually replace the legacy applications.
Okay.
So the legacy applications are still being used, but parts of it are extracted and are created as microservices. And we only separate the parts that can really be standalone. Like, for instance, if you have a financial application, we have your customers could be a database, and transactions could be a database, and account receivable could be a database.
Right. Credit reporting, fraud detection, indeed. All separate.
And those parts, they work together in the end, but we can afford to have one of those databases down and still have the application up for the most of the functionalities. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I'm thinking the next conference we should have a panel discussion just about doing databases as microarchitecture. There's a whole there's a whole bunch of learning discussion about that one. It's a challenging topic, I know, because I know that when we talked about cloud, which really I think, and containers, which really excel in that sort of microarchitecture world, but databases have struggled to some sense to work in a microarchitecture because so much depends on it. When it's down, there are other pieces that stop working sometimes. So it'd be great to have, maybe next time you should have a panel discussion or at least a talk and explain how the trade-offs you've had to do for microarchitecture and databases and how you've been able to. I'd love to hear that, because I hear people telling me it's hard. People telling me it's not possible sometimes, but it sounds like you're getting it working, and that would be really interesting to hear.
Well, dividing your application into microservices shouldn't be a goal on its own. It's just if you can do it, we do it. But if it's hard or not feasible or risky because some data can basically not be separated, then you shouldn't do it.
Right. I'd be interested to know, Ferdinand or Fadi, are you using any of the sort of non-relational aspects of Postgres, whether it's the full text search, JSON, PostGIS, any of that?
PostGIS for sure, and for the others.
Great.
For the other ones, to be honest, for the moment we still don't know because of the service. The PostgreSQL service over is very new in GRDF, so we still not have the full picture of what we got in the few months.
Great. Ferdinand, what about you?
Not at the moment, but I definitely see use cases, for example, for the JSON part. So really having some free-form data.
Great. And Benny?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, are you using any of the non-relational parts of Postgres? The parts like JSON or GIS or full text search or any of that NoSQL stuff?
Not really.
Or just strictly
not really.
Yeah.
Not really, no.
Yeah, that excites it. Usually it doesn't excite data architects as much. Usually the developers get very excited about that because it's sort of I think it separates Postgres a lot of ways from the current database, proprietary database that you have. Yeah, they have full text search kind of sort of. They got GIS kind of sort of. They have JSON kind of sort of, but in terms of having it sort of native to the database and sort of being able to participate fully in transactional support and sort of inner query stuff. Postgres really excels at that, and usually that's how Postgres kind of gets to be the de facto standard because it does all that stuff that a lot of people, have a lot of trouble doing. When you were, I'm just going to back up a lot to the beginning. What if you could walk me through the thought process, and maybe this is a little philosophical, of how did you first hear Postgres was a database, and what made you actually consider it? Because I know the initial reaction a lot of times at the enterprise of an open source database is like, no, that's just right off the top of the bat, like I just don't want to go there. But you've all three gone there. What made you go there?
Well, if I may start, as a DBA, I'm of course specialized in not many types of databases, but I felt obliged for my company to search a valid low-cost alternative, if possible, for my company. And that's how I got to Postgres. And because we always want a decent support organization behind it, that's why we came to Enterprise DB, basically.
But it didn't seem super risky to you.
Well, if we would have decided to migrate our legacy applications, that would have been probably too much risk for us. So we didn't touch those, and we went ahead with new applications and new development, and that works out really well. I must say, My colleague DBAs reacted favorably, and our developers. I mean, they didn't. They just adapted like that. We didn't even have to have any trainings for them. Of course, Postgres SQL is pretty much standard. Yeah.
And do you now that you're 6 years in, do you think it would be risky to convert your legacy to Postgres?
I still wouldn't do it. It's too much code. It's too much code. We might get caught in a trap trying to do it. And once you start, you want to succeed. And the code base of our legacy application is millions of rows, and we don't want to do that. No, I wouldn't advise to do that, basically. But it would be possible, I'm sure. EDB's migration assistant is really, really good, really strong. You just download a script that extracts your database schemas. You run it through the migration assistant, and it tells you exactly what needs to adapt.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess this is part of the larger shift to open source or the enterprise, right? I mean, Linux is open source, Apache is open source. All the middleware,
Yes.
is pretty much open source, and all the tooling and all of the JavaScript stuff. So it's sort of like the database kind of has to come. But Benny, the point you have really is that, and I think the reason the database is kind of lagged in terms of adoption, Linux took over the enterprise, 10, 12
Yes.
years ago. Postgres is just starting to make serious inroads there, or maybe it's a couple of years in, but still not as early as Linux. And I think part of that is exactly what you're saying, because with an operating system, you run things on top of the operating system. So as long as Oracle's ported to Linux, you just bring the whole thing to Linux, right? As long as your web server is on Linux, and you port that over. For a database, you often write code tailored specifically to that database. And it's very hard to undo that, and to it's just risky, as you're saying. What's the risk versus reward there if you've got millions of lines tied into a specific database? At a certain point, you have to decide. We've had customers like move off of DB2. They just felt that this wasn't where we wanted to be long term as an organization. Obviously, people were running Sybase, also in a very precarious situation in terms of where the database is going. Informix similarly, Ingress similarly, right? So as long as the database you're sort of tied to as legacy is active and vibrant, you can continue to make that decision. At some point, I think it's going to be harder, because I think it's going to be harder to say we want to stay with the proprietary database we had before. But you don't have to do that, as you're saying. You can just do new apps, as Ferdinand is doing, and then Ferdinand, you said you're actually now in the process of porting some stuff over. If you can explain how that's working.
It's worked out quite nice with Postgres. A lot of these legacy applications were coming from an Oracle platform, and it was quite easy for the developers to really work with the new system. It was also easy for the DBAs to support the new system, so that was really easy. I mean, the difference is really that with something you already have, which has been grown for a couple of years, there's always the question, what's the benefit? And if you build something small, you only can show a small thing, and there's still the old big system that people are used to, and they know where's the rest. So it's a bit harder. I think the risk is more on convincing the customers there. It's not a real open source risk I would see there. It's really something.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, thank you. I want to close with one question to each, and then we're going to take a question or two from the audience. Because this is a virtual conference, we do have recordings of all of the talks. So I'm just curious, if you listened to any talk from this conference, what was your favorite one? Benny, why don't you start?
Well, the talk just before our session here, Z-Heap, was really interesting because the way Postgres manages its let's say undo at this moment with vacuum and stuff like that is not optimal yet. And I think Z-Heap has a lot of promise. So I like that one particularly. Yeah.
And Hans is a great speaker, I'm sure. So I'm sure it was very entertaining.
He had a very
well.
nice presentation and very graphic, and that's what I need. If it has pictures, you have my attention.
Exactly. Farid, what about you?
I followed with attention the session before with Karen Jex about real application cluster because for me
that was great.
I only know the Oracle world, so it was pretty familiar for me, and to build a well-built service offer for the new PostgreSQL application that we'll get. It's very important for me to understand how it is working into the PostgreSQL world.
Yeah, that was my favorite because the Oracle rack thing is often a sort of a boogeyman. That's why we can't go to Postgres kind of question. And I think she did a great job. And the reason it's so hard is because Oracle Rack has certain features that are useful, but it comes with a lot of complexity and potential unreliability. And it's very hard for people to balance the feature that it's listed to do and the sort of nebulous complexity unreliability that's kind of hard to articulate. And I thought she did a really good job of that. Ferdinand,
Also
what about you?
The talk from Karen on the RAC, because it's about migrating, and RAC is one of the things we are looking into when migrating away from. And I still see something in there, but a lot of stuff just went in there just for historical reasons. And I think having some options there and being able to explain what options we have, that was really great about this talk.
Yeah, it really is. It's very similar. I have a blog about it on my website, but I sort of used to do research on sort of risk analysis, and what you find is that when you try and mitigate risk with some kind of safety system, the safety system can often be the reason that you have a failure. Everyone thinks safety systems like Oracle Rack are always a win, but safety systems can also be a source of unreliability, and it's hard to kind of people to get their head around that. And I think we're actually is just one example of a larger problem or a larger set of questions that we have, not only in the database world, but even in the IT world itself, of when is safety winning, when is safety a benefit, and when are some safety systems so complex or potentially cause unreliability that they're actually reducing safety. That is an interesting topic. Archana, you said we have some questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. I think there was one question. I was reading through the questions. There was one which said, how to get more ISV apps supported on Postgres. Does anyone know where to find a list of those that are?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How to get more ISV apps supported on Postgres. And where to find
it? Yeah. Yeah, that's a toughie. Does anyone want to take that in the group? I can answer, but it's a tough question. So you would think ISV apps would be a natural for Postgres because the reduced licensing, but at the same time, you have to have a certain density of people who want the database. So there's certainly ISVs who are paying 30-40% of their sale price for the database license. And they effectively could save that 30-40%, reduce their cost, allow them to get into more customers by using an open source. And there are some cutting edge vendors ISVs who are using Postgres, particularly in the ERP space and of course in the cloud space, who are all already using Postgres, allowing them to undercut a lot of the competition who are having to pay 30-40% license costs. But it is a big effort for ISVs, and ISVs typically are targeting vertical markets. So they've got a smaller market segment. It's hard for them to invest sometimes in supporting potentially a different database. Many of these are written for one database, and then now they've got to have multi-database, and that's additional development costs, and so they have to compete. That development cost their licensing. So it's the same really problem Benny has, right? How do you take a legacy thing and move it over in a way that's saving you money and not risking your business and stuff? I think it's happening, but it's an area you would think would have a lot more traction in Postgres than it does. And I think it's just a question of vendors starting to ask, why is Postgres not supported? Why are we having to pay a proprietary database for this application? It doesn't need it. It's making our life more complicated. And the good news is some enterprises are getting Postgres in the door because they buy an ISV app that has Postgres. And after a while, they're like, why are we running this other database we've been running Postgres with for this app forever, and it's been perfect? Why can't we just use it for everything? I know a particular hotel vendor who bought an app. It had Postgres in it. 9 months later, they're like, hey, why aren't we using this thing? So I guess that's the good news. Bad news, it's a slow go.
I have one more question.
So thanks very much for that question.
There were a couple more suggestions on what could be the next panel talks, and so that was good. And there was one more question from Toby, which is, any future plans to integrate blockchain tables into Postgres? I know MySQL 8 native clusters and sharing are popular. Does Postgres provide scale-out architecture similar to MySQL?
Yeah, we're going to have to hold on that because it's not really the topic of this panel. I'd be glad to answer if they want to send me a chat on the using the app there.
Toby,
but both I can answer both the questions. It's just not really relevant for the panel we have here.
Toby, you could message Bruce separately. There, you've got the direct message functionality within the platform as well. Perfect, yep. Brilliant. So I guess with that, I must thank everybody who has joined us today. Thank you, Bruce, Benny, Farid, and Ferdinand for this insightful session. And thanks to everyone for joining us for the event today. This is our last talk for the day, but we will be back again tomorrow at 8 o'clock and with more talks for you throughout the day. The session is still open, so you can still interact with the platform throughout and watch all the on-demand sessions. As I said before, this talk will be available a little later because we'll be editing the video and then uploading it back on. Thank you, everyone.